Hello, and welcome to another episode of Being High with Dualistic Unity. Today's guest is David Charles. David is the CEO of Mood, which is an incredible cannabis involved company. They do flower, they do gummies, and after hearing David's story and everything he's about, they care a lot. They care a lot about their people, they care a lot about their product, and they care a lot about just what the fuck's going on in reality. So this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I enjoyed about this conversation, David. His mentality, how he got to where he is, the fact that that mentality is reflected in his company just because he's talking to everybody. They're all working together. And so there's a mentality behind Mood that I would love to support if I lived in the States because, I don't. But that said, if David were my dealer, I would buy weed from David because he would be an awesome dealer because he gives a shit. He honestly cares. He's interesting as fuck. And this conversation gets way deeper than we expected it to. So we're stoked to introduce it to you. Enjoy. Uh, David, I wanted to say thank you, first of all, for being here and joining us. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you, as I know you've been on a journey for quite some time to lead you to where you are. If you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Mood, I would really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Mood has been a journey that kicked off in May of 2022. We went live with website sales in August of 2022. So we've been live for what is that, 16, 17 months. And it's been a wild ride. To date, we have serviced over 400,000 customers. We've got something like 35,000 five-star reviews, about 200 employees. And yeah, we're just kicking butt, taking names, having a lot of fun in the process. Uh, Prior to Mood, I was in health tech and telehealth, and before that, I was in productized e-commerce. My DNA is really as a performance marketer and as an operations guy.
Wow, that's incredible. Out of curiosity, how did you get into cannabis as a whole? Are you a longtime user, or is this something that was fairly recent in your life? Because for me, I've been involved, quote unquote, with cannabis since I was a teenager. So
Yeah,
I'm curious about your history.
yeah, of course. I think the first time I smoked weed, I was definitely not an age where I should have been smoking weed, but it's just, kids having fun and we were at a concert and I loved the stuff. Yeah, I'm sure everyone remembers, their first time or their first few times getting high and it's just an amazing feeling. It's fun and it's laughy and food has never tasted so good. It's like the first time eating food. And so yeah, I was a user back in the day. I guess I stopped for the most part when I was maybe 21 or so. At the time, it kind of turned on me, and I'm sure people have experienced that as well. And I didn't come back to it until I was maybe 30 or so. And I'm not like a super regular user now, but when I do use it now, I just like a low dose of THC. Just super low dose in an edible. That's my speed these days.
Oh yeah, I resonate with that for sure. I was contrary to Ray, I'm actually very new to cannabis. Like, yeah, I smoked some. I think first time I smoked was freshman year of college. Had a friend who was like still a good friend of mine. He had been a pothead for a while, and he had a bong, and he was like, "Oh, first time." Oh, and he's like, kind of a fucking asshole. And he's like, "Oh, first time. All right. I'm gonna light this, and you just suck." And don't stop until I tell you to stop. So it's like, all right. I've never even used a bong, never really even seen many people use one. So I'm just like, he's like, keep going. And I'm like, I gotta take another breath. He's like, that's fine, take another breath. I just kept so then he pulled it and he's like, all right, now inhale a little bit. And we're in our freshman dorm, and I'm just right there, like completely new experience, and just like smacked in the face with it. And I had to leave the room and just I sat in the hallway, and the only thing I remember saying is I feel like I'm on a roller coaster right
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
And that was like well, what I told him when I came back inside, and he was like laughing his ass off because it's playful in a sense. In a sense, it's like really fucked up, but he also knew I'd be fine through it, because it is fairly harmless. But yeah, so just a little bit of backstory. And so more recently, I kind of got away from it for a while. Had a very difficult time in college actually with it, and I found at least my sort of X factor with how I do with it is how seriously I'm taking myself for the most part. And like I was way more tense and rigid in college than I feel now. And I had a very difficult time, and it's gotten like easier and easier and easier the more I've been relaxed in my life. And so I see that transition with kids, a lot of teenagers who get into it, and then as they get into their 20s, start taking themselves a little more seriously, and they have a tougher time. Whereas, like, in their teenage years, it was just like, they just laughed and had a good time with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really I mean, especially with high doses or, smoking out of a bong, it can really be a psychedelic experience. And it'd just be like taking mushrooms or acid. If your life is full of tension and stress and anxiety, you're not going to have a good experience. It might be a healthy experience. It might be something you need to have, but it's not going to be fun.
Well said. Absolutely. And I would think that that appreciation for how much of an impact it could have really goes into what you do with mood. Actually, that's a great question. Where did the name mood
Oh,
come from?
yes. I neglected to answer your prior question, which is how I got back into cannabis. But I was working in health tech, and it's a challenging field. There's a lot of really interesting problems to solve if you're, you know, kind of a data person like I am. I find that stuff fascinating. But I was catching up with an old co-founder, Jake, and he said, "Hey, I've been working in cannabis in Canada, and there's an immense opportunity in e-commerce. Let's do this in the United States." And I said, the Delta stuff, it's at gas stations, it's everywhere. There's nothing there, man. And he said, no, really, trust me, look at it. And so I did. And the more I looked at it and the more we talked about it, the more we thought, the vision kind of came into clarity. And the name was part of that. Given that I had the experiences with cannabis that I had, which is at one point it was really fun, and then all of a sudden it was not so fun, that kind of melded with all the emerging research around cannabis and around minor cannabinoids and around terpenes. And everybody has been going on this whole indica or sativa train for, I mean, shit, as long as I've been around. And I thought there's more to it than that. And your average user doesn't care to understand everything about terpenes and everything about minor cannabinoids. They just want to get high and they want it to be what they're looking for. And so the name Mood really came about as that sort of genesis, which was like, can we do this? Can we sell weed by mood so that, people can get what they want? And that was, I think it's something that, not a lot of brands are out there doing. And regardless of the competition though, we want people to have an experience that they want to have.
Wow. Okay, I'm really curious about that because that was a question that I was thinking about, was like why you're called mood. And I know on your site you kind of talk about how like there are, the variations in moods and the ways you do that. And because we've actually spoken to a few other cannabis gummy specific founders, and a lot of times they're like, they actually one specifically brought up mood, and they basically told us like we want to be mood one day at some
That's
point. They're like looking up to you guys. So I was curious though with the difference in moods and like how you blend that stuff. Is it terpene focused then entirely, and like how you test the combinations and just everything about that sort of differentiation?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, a big part of it is terpenes. And the analogy that I've heard, that I didn't make this up, but it's a good one, is that THC is the engine and terpenes and minor cannabinoids are the steering wheel. Um, and it's one of these things, it's part art, it's part science. And the science side, you really got to know this stuff. You really have to have studied terpenes and studied minor cannabinoids and read a ton and experienced a ton to really have a good eye for it. And at the end of the day, I mean, make no bones about it. It's a living plant and everybody's body is different. So, the one strain that we call sleepy, it's not going to be the perfect sleepy time strain for everybody. You still have to experiment. our goal on it, kind of our SLA on our threshold is that if we sell a strain and it's a certain mood, we want at least 80, if not 90% plus of people who use that strain to raise their hand and say, yes, I felt energized, or yes, I felt creative. But ultimately, everybody's body is different. You got to experiment. You got to find the right thing. And that kind of goes into something else that's really important to us as a brand is continuity. It's tricky with craft cannabis to be able to sell the same strain all the time and not go out of stock and not constantly be rotating. But with the approach that we're taking, we're introducing a lot of new users to cannabis, a lot of first-time users, a lot of users that, they haven't used cannabis in 10, 20, 50 years. We want to be that dependable place where they can go, or once they find their strain, they can always get it. It's always going to be the same. So that's, an operational challenge.
I imagine it's probably somewhat of a social challenge as well, because there are quite a few people out there that are, let's say, not a fan of the idea of normalizing cannabis use. How has that gone for you throughout your journey in terms of facing that, not that backlash, because I don't know how much backlash you might get, but there is certainly going to be an overall frown from some people.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, the biggest frown comes from the marijuana folks, and they see us as exploiting a loophole. And I get it. They've been toiling away in this hyper, really over-regulated marijuana industry for a decade, 2 decades, and then all of a sudden, in the last couple of years, companies like us come along, and we're not beholden to 280E, and we can advertise. And I get it. But, if you look at the letter of the law, the 2018 Farm Bill, there's no loophole. It's just the letter of the law. And, I've come across some LinkedIn threads where, 80 people in the comments are all, they're talking trash about us. And, it on a human level, honestly, yeah, I mean, it hurts my feelings. I don't like the idea of like a room full of people that are just bad mouthing like everything I've put my heart and soul into. But like, people are people, and I forget, I don't know if it's Joe Rogan or somebody, people say out there, don't read the comments. So I try not to read the comments, and it our core values are delivering an amazing quality product, shipping it fast, treating our people really well. Like our employees have, amazing health insurance, above market wages. Like that's what we care about. So we just try not to listen to the noise.
Well, and I think it's really important to remember that almost all positive change is going to be met with resistance from people who are invested in the opposite mentality. I mean, you are doing a good thing, and you can actually gauge your progress by how many people you're upsetting. So, I mean, on that level, kudos. I rather look forward to all the people who get upset about what we're doing here and how we do it, just because we're always encouraging you to be yourself. And it's amazing how many people that upsets. And it's just because there's so much investment in trying to be something else that relaxation itself is a threat.
Absolutely. In the name, in the words of Kanye West, um, screams from the haters got a nice ring to it. I guess every superhero needs some theme music.
Fuck yeah, dude. I fucking love it. Oh my gosh. So with and because that's been something that we've enjoyed a lot, just like this stigma surrounding it. And so I'm curious with you guys and how you operate, like in terms of marketing. Like, because I didn't notice, I wasn't able to find you guys on social media or Instagram. And so along those lines, how much do you focus on existing cannabis users and this being like the best product for them to go to versus, because there's a big pool of people who aren't into cannabis at all? Do you focus any of your marketing attention on bringing people into cannabis in general, that then you are the product for them to use as, a new cannabis user?
Absolutely. We're all about introducing new users or reactivating, users that haven't used in, a decade plus, to the category. That's kind of the impetus with the company, is like that was the opportunity we saw, which is like if you're a cannabis user, you're already Googling it, you're already searching around, and you've got, three different guys that you buy from, and maybe you go to the dispensary, whatever. Like, cool, like how about it? But our whole thought was like, the country's in a place where it's really largely destigmatized. It's something like, well, like 80% of Americans think all cannabis should just be legal. Um, but you have these state marijuana programs that are hyper taxed and they're hyper regulated, and a lot of states don't have them. And we thought, okay, like for those 80% of Americans who think it should be legal, but they can't get it, or they have this negative stigma remaining, like someone who grew up in the days of reefer madness, or grew up in a red state where it's conservative and all the rest of it. I thought we can go out there and we can tell them stories and provide messaging and marketing materials that can really destigmatize it and put it into context, which is that it's a plant. It's a plant. It's always been around. They were using cannabis in biblical times. So at the end of the day, if you want to, enjoy some kind of adult substance to relax, you could drink some, a couple glasses of wine or drink a six pack, or you could smoke a joint. Like, that's what we're about. It's just hardworking cannabis for hardworking Americans.
That's awesome. Um, I have to ask because, of course, you're involved with so many different parts of the process from cultivation onwards. Do you have a favorite part of the business yourself, an industry or a niche that you are more invested in than others?
Honestly, it's the first part of what you said, which is I'm across it all. It's hyper engaging for me because in order to be good at my job, I need to not only have kind of a surface level knowledge, but be able to speak in depth and be a good collaborative partner for everything we're doing, whether it's operations, customer support, product sourcing, R&D, data analytics, marketing, branding, all of it, digital product, technology, and engineering. I need to be able to get deep and in order to guide our team to execute our strategy. And it's, what a gift. Like on a daily basis, I get to like look at so many different things. I would get bored, I think, if I was only focused on one thing.
I love it. Absolutely. Nonlinear learning. That's something I've always kind of referred to. I homeschool my daughter, or rather, I have. Now she's 17, or 16, 17. So it's not so much on me anymore, but it's just that idea of being able to pick from different things and be engaged, because what you're learning underneath it all is about yourself, about your own ability to deal with things when you don't expect them, or when they're not going the way that you want them to, or where you don't feel like you know enough. How has that process been, just in terms of self knowledge over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely sharpened me up. Yeah, you know, you're definitely forced to become incredibly resourceful and humble. You got to be humble. We have a culture of pushing back and presenting an opinion or presenting something that you're pretty sure is true, and then actually being receptive like a sponge to hearing why are you wrong, and you look for that. You come to look for that, and it's kind of a magical dynamic that can happen when everybody's ego is at the door and nobody is their self-esteem is tied up in being right. If you remove all of that, then you can make better decisions. And you can actually cross-pollinate things. Like when you learn something in one area of the company, you can take those lessons and give them to another area of the company.
Oh, wow. Yeah, absolutely love that. Yeah, the podcast in general, as much as we have this segment, the being high with dualistic unity is primarily, we talk a lot about setting that idea of yourself, your own expectations, your ideas about what you think should be happening or shouldn't be happening, your ideas about yourself, your ideas about other people aside, and what life can be like without so much of that. Because as much as we appear to value that, or we think think there is value in that sense of knowing, that sense of control, really isn't, because like control doesn't exist, and we know that, but like we really want there to be control. No, I want to know myself. I have this idea of myself, and that's definitely how I am, who I am, what I do, and oftentimes it not oftentimes, literally all the time, it holds us back from growing and changing and shifting. And so yeah, I know there's been some stories in the past. I've reading up on a couple of your other interviews of some very uncertain periods or difficult times with mood. So is that something, I mean, I can only imagine, and us as entrepreneurs, something we come to kind of expect is facing that and dealing with that. How has your relationship with uncertainty kind of shifted as you've, you know, grown up and, been involved in businesses, especially an entrepreneurial one like Mood?
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurially speaking, I've gotten the shit kicked out of me more times than I can count. Where you really put your everything, and it's so vulnerable to really try as hard as you can. It's why most people don't try, or it's why most people don't try as hard as they can, because then subconsciously you understand, your psyche understands, if it doesn't work out, I have an excuse. I didn't really put my everything into it. So you really gotta, there's no other way though. You have to put yourself on the line. You have to be willing to really get your heart broken, and really go through difficult financial times. Like, there is no, when you leave yourself no backup plan and you burn every bridge behind you to put your all into something. In years past, I'm 33 now, but I've been at this, I guess since entrepreneurial journey, since I was 24, 25. There have been plenty of times where, like I'm, selling stuff to make rent, or, had a girlfriend, for a number of years, and, she was a great sport. A date night sometimes meant like, I'm going to cook at home, or like, we're going to Applebee's, baby. Like, no, no Capital Grille tonight, like, uh, but it's just part of it. And at the end of the day, not to like be like too pessimistic, but like life can be suffering, life can be hard. And it's just like, you can, I think, as Thoreau said, most people lead lives of quiet desperation. And you can kind of succumb to that, and that idea that you're not going to really pursue your dreams. You can do that, but if you choose the other way, there's no avoiding. You just got to tolerate the uncertainty, tolerate the pain, and hopefully you find happiness.
Isn't it funny, right? Because it's in the process of doing that, of tolerating the pain, of not running from it, that you recognize how strong you are. You
Yeah.
recognize how capable you are. And isn't that the sense of happiness? We're chasing this idea of happiness, but it actually comes from going through the storm. It comes from facing the uncertainty with a certain degree of willingness. Even if it's grudging willingness, that's better than going, I don't want to do it, because then you're not going to, and you're going to get more and more of the same. This words to live by. Absolutely,
Yeah.
man. That was fantastic.
Thank you. You ever look at yourself in the mirror, like look yourself in the eyes in the mirror, and talk to yourself? Yeah. It's like, yeah, I think like the more you do that kind of thing, um, the more you become willing to stop running from the fear and just say, I'm afraid. Fuck it. I'm gonna do it anyways because it's what I want.
Oh yeah, like so much is that like we're actually we do some like Patreon group chats and have a whole big community, and we were talking just this morning about discomfort and how much we have, collectively we have this aversion to discomfort and like prioritization of comfort. But so often when you're willing to jump into discomfort or be uncomfortable, like that's when all the growth and change and shifts really happen in your life, right? And so we have this aversion to it, but like, what if it wasn't so much about, oh, I want to be comfortable, I don't want to be uncomfortable, and you started to see discomfort as just like the first step of this whole pattern, and it's just like this wall that we keep butting up against. It's like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable, I'm not going to do it. Oh, that makes me uncomfortable, I'm not going to do it. But like once you're just like, fuck it, I'm cool with being uncomfortable. It's like the whole world opens up because it's not so much this prioritization of, oh, I feel bad, I want to feel good. How am I going to feel good? It's like I feel bad, whatever. I'm going to still be able to do stuff no differently. And then it's like as you do those things, then you feel a little bit better because you're doing it, but it wasn't from focusing on the feeling itself. And so I've almost been wondering if it's not to like ignore feelings necessarily, but just not base your life upon how you feel so much. Like not let that be the indicator of how I live my life or what I do in my life, because it's going to be fluctuating, and it actually is allowed to fluctuate almost more frequently the less I focus on it, in a
Yeah, it's
sense.
it's kind of paradoxical, but it's like the idea that we actually can't multitask. That's a total misnomer. We're really good at rapidly oscillating and focus shifting between different things, but you can actually only focus on one thing at once. So you actually you can't you can, to an extent, like you can't be afraid if you're focusing intently on what it is you're doing. And I'm curious, you're talking about, seeking discomfort. And I love that. And that's something that's kind of been on my mind. I wonder, am I just getting older? Like I see a lot of more of that stuff. Am I just getting older, and like older people kind of talk about that stuff as they kind of grow up? Or like in the last like 5, 10 years, like has this all of a sudden become a cultural thing that people are waking up to?
That is a fantastic question, because I woke up to the idea that I was making things harder on myself by running all the time. When I was in my early 20s, and for years nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to talk about being yourself or anything like that. And then all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, the last 5 to 10 years, it's just popping up more and more and more. And it's because there have been people who are just like, but why isn't it worth talking about, regardless of all that judgment, regardless of all of that, again, that backlash. um, it's really interesting to watch, but it's the basis for our podcast. The fact
Yeah.
that there is a change in the cultural discussion that is happening in terms of, well, it's actually really interesting, because what you were saying earlier is that THC is like the engine and terpenes are basically the steering wheel. It's very much the same in terms of feeling being the engine and our attitude about that feeling being the steering wheel, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden we can run from it or we can face it head on. And so much of our culture is running from it. No, we're going to make that stop. We're going to make people stop saying those things. We're going to make, that experience stop happening for you. You can buy your way out of it. It's so much control. And yet what we're facing, or what we're introducing, is the idea that you don't need control, just influence, if you're in the shit as it's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to play off of that, then, like, over the last 5, 10 years, like, is it like, I don't know, Rosa Parks said sometimes you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. Has society just become like just sick and tired of it, or is it like podcasts and platforms and engagement with like, how are these ideas all of a sudden like at the forefront of the cultural zeitgeist?
It's been crawling this way for a while. It really has, like, it's funny you say zeitgeist, because I remember when that movie actually came out, or that series of videos came out in 2007, 2008ish, and
Hmm.
it was out of necessity, because there was so much imbalance in the system. There has to be, some degree of questioning, and that's what's changed, is that we're questioning things that at one point we were just kind of comfortable accepting, like, oh yeah, I know the system's running fine. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, hold up, because there's so much evidence that it's not. And so I would say it's of necessity that we are waking up collectively. But what's interesting about that is that we have this perception that we are separate, because we spend so much time thinking about ourselves. And as soon as we're thinking about ourselves, in the same way, as soon as we're thinking about the fear and not what we're doing, right, we succumb to the fear. Well, as soon as we are thinking about ourselves, we immediately feel divided from everything. We're trying to value ourselves, we're comparing ourselves, we're competing with our assumptions of others, we're doing all of this stuff. But the alternative is to just be who you are, which is everything. Everything in motion is connected. There is no division, but we act like there is. And so there's so much in terms of just recognizing we're getting carried away in stupid shit that doesn't really matter, because it's not actually real.
Yeah,
I think it's
100%.
it's of necessity. It's coming because it has to.
Do you think that Gen Z is kind of on this track? Because, I'm 33. I don't hang out with a lot of 19-year-olds, but like it sure seems like young people are kind of like facing the screen, TikTok, likes, engagement on social media. And like it just seems like they're going down like a very, very lonely, dark path, kind of away from the light. Whereas we're talking about moving towards the light and embracing an authentic, genuine human experience. What do you think? What do you think the future holds for Gen Z?
I have a couple
Uh,
thoughts, but
I have one thought, and I'll pass it over to you, Andrew.
yeah.
It's as above, so below. It's always the same way. Like, we go through this period of avoidance and this period of irresponsibility until finally all the consequences pile up, and we end up having a mental health breakdown, which is what we're seeing everywhere, over and over and over. More and more people looking to therapy, not recognizing that they have a lot of power over their own mentality. It's just that they're still looking for the help instead of being their own help.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that they are on a rapid journey towards the realization that it's on them. I think they're doing it the hard way in a very small, compressed period of time, because they get really caught up in the idea of themselves. Look at me, I'm going to be famous. People are going to love me. I'll look at all the likes, look at all these connections, blah, blah, blah. And then it all turns to ash. And they have to come back to, right, it's on me. It's on me. I recently witnessed my daughter go through this. As I said, she's about 16 and a half, 17. And she was getting really caught up in the Snapchatting and TikTok and likes and all that stuff. And about 6 months ago, she looks at me and she's like, my life really suffers when I focus on other people liking me. I was like, holy shit. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And she just kind of took it in. And ever since, she's made more and more efforts to make her own time for herself, make more and more efforts to look at the quality of the friendship rather than just, yay, it's friendship. And she's done so just through hitting the wall, because I never stopped her from hitting that wall.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's just that period of self reflection. So in my own house, I've seen that change. And I think it's coming in to a larger degree of necessity again.
Yeah. That's incredibly profound. You must be, I mean, of any, achievement or accolade or whatever, like that kind of personal growth is incredible for a 16-year-old. My God.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked about it.
Yeah, fucking kudos. Because Ray's also homeschooled his daughter her whole life, so there's been less of that systemic influence. So she's had more space and time to actually reflect, which is like makes so much sense. Like not to throw kids into a fucking basically work environment at the age of 5 and then judge them the entire time as they go, and that just being. And it's interesting because like when it comes to the generational sort of thing you asked about Gen Z, and even just seeing it from like in the immediacy of like human history, going from tribal society to where we're at now. Like in tribal society, there wasn't so much of this idea that you could control what was going on. There was a lot more like physical dangers at play. Like if we couldn't control our environment temperature wise, so we had to move as the temperatures changed and shifted. There's not so many barriers, just we've been able to basically force out nature. So like there were wild animals around, you had to pay more attention basically, or else there were physical repercussions. And like there's been sort of a shift, and who knows, maybe reality just constantly fluctuates through these shifts, and we're just at a point where since then we've been able to build these sort of structures and give us this more of this sense of control to avoid the physical dangers. But now we have psychological dangers rooted in this conceptual idea. It's no longer that I'm worried about me physically staying alive, it's me conceptually staying alive, being liked by people. And so that degree of suffering from not paying attention to what's actually going on, because when you're paying attention to what's actually going on, you're more physically safe, but you're more psychologically, quote unquote, safe, because if you're paying attention to what's actually going on, you can't simultaneously be thinking about yourself quite so much. And there's been this jump from like the repercussions being physical to the repercussions being mental. Now, this thing happened, I got embarrassed. Now I think negatively about myself. And so that's my suffering that I'm experiencing. But as that then gets so extreme, like we can't avoid the danger because now it's internal or seemingly internal, we start to realize, all right, where does that stem from? Where does anxiety stem from? Ray said this a bunch of times, like it always stems from this sense of control, this false sense of control. Like I'm anxious because I feel like I can possibly control the situation into happening in the way that I want it to happen so that I'm perceived in the way that I want. And that's not possible. Like you can't actually do that. And so we're butting up against the repercussions of believing that control exists, that control is something that we can garner. And so as more and more people are starting to let go of be themselves, because there's no way for me to actually have control over how you see me, so I might as well just be myself. But if there is this illusion that I can control how you see me and I can guarantee you like me as long as I do these things, as long as I'm normal, as long as I dress this way and act this way and don't get too, crazy and emotional and flamboyant or whatever, as long as I maintain this and everyone else is maintaining this. And so there's a lot of rigidity there. But then, the shift, the pendulum swings back, and it swings back more towards letting go, freedom. And who's to say we can't have some semblance of this sort of society maintained, but with just a little bit less idea of control, a little bit more freedom, because we see that control, it doesn't have the payoff that we once thought.
No, I mean, not that anybody's done any kind of, sociological real review on like the most famous Instagram people or TikTok people, but I'd be willing to bet that you don't become happy when you crack, 100,000 likes a picture. Like it just doesn't, it's kind of just a deep, dark treadmill hole.
Oh yeah. No, I can attest because I've been doing the social media stuff for a bit, and it like the bar keeps changing as you get to a certain point. And just recently, because I got into like basically found this kid that I followed who kind of figured out a solid social media blueprint, a way to like make videos more or less go viral by having a really solid hook, gets people in, and then given the given some time so that there's this prolonged viewing time, which makes something more or less go viral. And if you hit the spot in the right spot, and then you get it. And so had a few video like for a couple of months, had a few videos, a number of videos go pretty viral, gained a bunch of followers, and it's been hitting me more recently that was like a curated version of myself. It wasn't really myself. It was like this contorted version, because if I were to act like this, then I would have control of this happening. If I were to structure a video like this, there's this sense of control of this happening. But it's like, is that really what's best, though? And now, as I'm starting to relax a little bit more in my life, cannabis has definitely been something that I've utilized to amplify that relaxation. I feel like I'm being more myself, and like the thought of gaining followers doesn't have the same pull. So I've actually been trying to, not like trying to lose followers necessarily, but just like trim the fat a little bit, in the sense of the fringe followers who were just like saw one video and they're like, oh, I like what he said there. So I'm being more willing to be myself and just like not shy away from controversial topics. And there's like, because every time you post something controversial, it's polarizing. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of people who are pissed at you, like sharing more cannabis related videos, get a lot of comments of people who, just still have a negative stigma, telling me I'm, addicted and doing something wrong and bad. But then there's also the side of people who really, really appreciate that, who do it themselves. And so in polarization, by just being yourself, because you're not following some standard, you're inevitably going to find the people that you connect with far more quickly. But it's almost equatable to the ones who don't as much, and you got to be willing to be like, yeah, I don't need a million friends, just a couple, and I'll find those a lot more quickly by being myself.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And for anyone who's in any kind of business, any kind of consumer facing business, whether it's content, products, or services, it's tough to find a balance because it's a core channel of business, social media. At the same time, it's like, all right, if you read about narcissism is this word that gets thrown around and used and abused until it's essentially meaningless. But if you look up like what are the core tenets of narcissism, like what are what would Carl Jung say about it? Well, really, a narcissist is somebody who doesn't actually interact with the world as their authentic self. They have such low self-esteem that they only present to the world an idealized self, which is essentially an avatar of who they wish they were. And the avatar interacts with the world. That's clinical narcissism. And for a clinical narcissist, life is a hall of mirrors. They're constantly looking to see how am I coming across? What's my reflection? And it's sad because, social media, for all the times that people misuse the word narcissism, like it really does encourage this sort of walking through a hall of mirrors as an idealized avatar form. Like it it promotes that.
And it's certainly something that I think there is a spectrum of. Like when we talk about narcissism, we're talking about people who are at the extreme end of getting self-absorbed. But everybody's kind of on that spectrum to some degree. And I mean, we forget that. Even with psychosis is thinking that your thoughts are real. Every time you're worried for an entire night about somebody judging you that never happened, that's a little bit of psychosis. And that's not necessarily something you should panic about, but it's something to keep in mind. It's something to understand in terms of these are behaviors. They're not necessarily disorders. They're behaviors that are taken to an extreme, right? One thing I always found funny is that accusing somebody of being a narcissist is something that a narcissist would often do. And so you really have to question how easily you're throwing that word around and why. Is it really about them or is it about you?
Yeah. You accuse others of what you're guilty of.
Oh yeah, so often like those who frustrate you are usually just showing you sides of yourself that you've suppressed or avoided or don't want to see. And yeah, that definition of narcissism, that sounds like most of the world for the most part. Like people are really trying, and so it is very much that spectrum. But when it does come to social media, I was curious about, with your strategies, because you talked a little bit about the business side, but with marketing, advertising, because quite frankly, like I've been, we have this podcast now. I do my own sort of cannabis stuff. I do like, gummy runs on social media and really really enjoy it, but I haven't seen mood come across a whole lot. So I'm curious about what your, marketing strategy, social media strategy, if it's a thing, and how you think about that marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we kind of let the algo do its thing. We run a lot of paid ads, spend 6 figures a day on paid digital ads. And the algorithm shows them to some people and not to others. But really, when you're at that scale, you really just have to let the algorithm do its thing. I'd say, I've been in ad buying for a long time, and 10 years ago, it was all about the different tactical media buying levers that you're pulling with audiences and exclusions and media buying strategies and campaign formats, all a bunch of technical stuff. But the ad platforms have done a really great job of making these like pretty accessible. You don't need, in other words, like they've made it so that you can spend 30 minutes poking around the ad platform and be able to launch an ad and have like a decent chance of getting shown to the right people. So with that, the levers all mostly get removed. And these days it's a creative arms race. It's all about capturing attention and it's all about effective storytelling. But all that to say, within that, when you're spending as much as we do, we could go hyper targeted and we could say, moms who live in Texas who make above $75,000 a year and have an interest in pop culture. Like we're gonna blow through that audience in a day. Like it doesn't scale.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fair. And I have to ask in terms of marketing, because very much you're focused on the mood, which I imagine would change the overall conversation that you have with a lot of your customers in your marketing. Is that something that you really focus on in terms of that different conversation? Because I imagine that would change the demographic in itself.
We're always testing. Generally speaking, we really our strategy is first and foremost, we want to capture attention. And then once we have that attention, we try to tell effective stories. But you figure, when is somebody on Facebook or YouTube? A lot of times, they're 5 minutes before a meeting or taking a bath or whatever. But they're kind of both of these experiences are disruptive ad experiences in that somebody goes on Facebook to look at, cat pictures and, whatever. They're not going there to look at ads for the most part, unless they're, guys like me or maybe guys like you. But we just want to meet people where they are. And we want to convey that education. And truthfully, it's been a huge pain point over the last year, the education on our website. I mean, I get told a lot nowadays that, you guys have such a nice website. I'm always flattered, but, we're our own worst critics and we're not so thrilled with the website. We've been working on it for much of the last year, and actually in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're dropping a completely new website, completely new branding, completely new pages, all kinds of different formats for educating people and storytelling in accessible ways and in multiple ways, whether it's text, video, or both. But to kind of circle back to your question, I just say that we try to get across that you can buy cannabis for your mood. But the first question we always need to kind of address is, yes, you can buy cannabis online. Yes, it's federally lawful. Yes, it has an amount of THC that will give you the benefits that you enjoy, and kind of make those points. And then we want to branch more into educating and going deeper on it.
Nice. That definitely makes sense. I am curious because you never mentioned anything about like Instagram, TikTok. Do you guys have a presence there, or is there a reason that that has been maybe not done yet?
TikTok is really touchy on cannabis, so we just haven't pursued it. I mean, every now and then I'll search on TikTok in my browser. I refuse to have TikTok on my phone or Instagram. But I'll search and people are throwing up videos about us and talking about us, and that's really cool. We do have an Instagram, but it hasn't taken off. Organic has really not taken off for us. We've got like 6,000 followers and we post regularly. And there's definitely utility to just having an Instagram that, obviously you weren't able to find it. That's definitely a miss. But if somebody wants to find it, it's just a marker of like, okay, yes, it's a real company. They do exist. It's not like some total scam if they have an Instagram. But we've been focused on scaling ads, not so much organic, and we just haven't found success in it yet.
That's fair. Marketing is always really tricky, especially when everybody's trying to do the same thing, which is one thing that I think really differentiates mood is again the focus on the mood. Out of curiosity, ballpark, how many people do you think you work with on a day-to-day basis?
We have a core management team of, I think, seven, myself included. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, if you're counting Slack, actually, let me just pull up my calendar to reference.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So like I don't know, earlier I was on a call with our management team. Before that, I had a call with two folks from our side and our legal team. Before that, I had a one-on-one. Yesterday, I had a call with our government relations and more legal and I don't know. I'm guessing on a daily basis, if you're talking like who am I talking to? Probably like 5 to 10 people. And if it's Slack as well, like we're big on Slack, then it's more like 20, something like that.
That's awesome. The reason I ask, because I understand it seems like a very random question. Even our listeners, like, why the fuck are you going there? Is it goes back to our original conversation about that difference in mentality, that difference in attitude, about the things that you're feeling, about work as a whole, about relationships, about all of that. That difference between, oh, why is this happening to me? And, oh, what can I do with this? Now, as you obviously embody that and have been practicing that throughout your career, throughout your journey, you are always having that impact on everybody else that you talk to, and everybody else in that organization would have the same impact and ripple outwards, and all of that. And I've noticed over the years that that really separates the people who interact with me for a long period of time. Anybody who doesn't want to take responsibility or take accountability and move forward just tends to disappear after a certain point, after a certain amount of time. And so, in the process of meeting growers, for example, in meeting other companies that you're working with, in establishing your network, how has that gone? Because I know not every relationship is going to be, you rosy fields and all that from the start. You're going to go through some people who, well, they fuck you over. Not to put too fine a point on it. How has that happened? And do you feel that you are now at a point where your structure and your community reflects your own mentality to a very large degree?
To a very large degree, yes. Um, and we're continually working on culture building. We're talking about that on our management call today, more about how can we continually systemize the reinvestment into culture and bringing everybody kind of along the journey and establishing values and maintaining them and building them. But sure, I mean, like on the fringes, especially when we're dealing with other companies, some of them are great, some of them are not. Sometimes, I'm sure you guys know, people talk a really big game and then they no show a call. And or they talk a big game, they on the call, and then the first order is completely fucked, and or the third order is, and it's like it's tricky, but I think it's especially in our space, it's just a consequence of legal regulate and regulatory, that the environment is fraught with issues that have prevented a lot of really good people from wanting to enter the space. And if a lot of the really good people don't want to enter the space, then what's left are still some good people, but also a lot of really not so good people. And incidentally, if any growers are listening, and you grow killer compliant, chain of custody compliant THC hemp flower, we'd love to talk to you.
That's awesome. It just so happens that I used to work in cannabis for a number of years. I've got a good network of cannabis connections, as well as Oren Allen, who used to work with Cureleaf. He is now working with us here at Dualistic Unity. And so I know he has a lot of connections. These episodes are great. We specifically do these episodes to encourage people to make connections like this, because it's not about the money. It's about the mentality that the plant is teaching you. It's about the work that you're doing on the plant. When all of a sudden you're super anxious, you're like, what am I holding on to? Not what is wrong with this strain? Right. And so what's nice is that that's a big part of the changing discussion, is that level of responsibility. Right. And people are often uncomfortable about that. But I find more bud tenders are kind of like, if you get a little panicky, just relax. Just breathe. You're going to be just fine, as opposed to, if you get a little panicky, it's not the strain for you. It's like, you're going to be okay. Maybe it's a bit intense for you, but you're going to still ride it out. There's that note of empowerment, I think, and I think we're seeing a lot more of that, and I think it's reflected in who we are. It's not a deliberate message. As you were saying, there's a swing in our consciousness. There's a swing in our collective discussion. And I think mood is very much a part of that collective swing, which leads me to my next question. because we've already talked about the fact that our haters will get together in small hordes to talk about us behind our back. Have you found a collective community of mood lovers in the same way? Have you discovered that I know you're not a big fan of having social media on your phone, but you have checked out Reddit, you've looked at different forums, things like that. There has to be a community of people who are fond of what you're doing and absolutely encouraging of the impact that it's having.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I come across threads in Reddit. People love us, which is really nice. And I'll see YouTube videos where, completely unsolicited, somebody's throwing up a review and they're talking about the ways we've changed their lives. I have a personal ritual every Saturday. I'm reading our reviews. It's impossible to read every single one of them, but I'm spending, 30 minutes. I'm just going through seeing who wrote what about us in the last week. And some weeks are really hard and some weeks are really taxing and I work too many hours and get stressed and all the rest of it. But, that kind of brings me back to, it makes it worth it along the way as well. Aside from all the great people I get to work with, being able to see like all these efforts, like it's not numbers on a screen. These are people and they're people's lives and they all have stories. Oh, and actually that's a super cool initiative that we're doing right now. Humans of New York. It's this
Yes,
guy, he's a
familiar.
photographer, and for like 15 years or something, he just walks around the streets of New York and he finds random people and he'll take their picture and he'll get these really profound, raw, vulnerable interviews, like their life stories, like really sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's happy, but just like real human vignettes. And he's been doing this for like 15 years. It's an incredible collection of humanity. And so we're doing Humans of Mood, or we're calling it Faces of Mood. And I think we're 3 videos in at this point. We are getting in touch with some of the customers that buy the most from us, and we're saying like, yo, like we're not going to pay you, but we'd really love to tell your story if you're up for it. And then we fly videographers out to them, and videographers, they like one of them is an Italian documentarian, and the other's a producer, and she's really talented, and we tell their stories. So that's going live on the new website as well. Like we really want to humanize everything it is we're doing.
Wow, that is really cool because I think it was Bob Marley said once the herb shows you yourself. And so incorporating cannabis into people's lives changing, it always makes you think like it's just people coming closer to being themselves in a lot of ways. And it's allowing them to sort of jump into that a little bit more because I've thought, at least in my own life, how I've sort of thought about my experience with cannabis is like every time I do it, it's showing me the gap between how much I'm being myself or not being myself and how tense or relaxed I am. And it's kind of like putting it in my face. It's hard to avoid that when you're high. And so for me, I was always pretty serious, like very straight edge, hardcore rule follower. And so even the thought of, smoking weed was something I had an aversion to, but it was also like, being loose and relaxed and like fucking laughing even. And so when I was high, I would see a little bit more of that. So when I was younger, maybe in college, there were times where I enjoyed it and times where I really, really didn't, like, especially on some edibles, really difficult time, which is why it's kind of funny that I incorporate edibles into a lot of my content now. But I think there's this sort of gap that cannabis is showing us. But in our world, we have so many reasons not to be ourselves. You
Yeah.
got to turn into something. You got to become something. You got to make money. You got to don't want to be judged. All these reasons. So I think that's fucking awesome that you guys are doing that because it's showing almost more of an authenticity to just humanity. And that's,
Yeah.
I'm sure, what a lot of the stories will reflect.
That's what it is. It's like you say, like when you get high, like the masks that we go about putting on to get through the day, those all kind of come off, and you're left with something that's raw and human, and it's unavoidable. That is what we want to do, and so far the videos I've seen, we're doing a great job of it, but we really, we don't want to like tell the story of like somebody who's like still wearing all their masks. We want to be like, here's like a human element of a real person. Do you guys remember the HBO show when it was about the weed dealer? I forget what it was called. He was a weed dealer and he was in New York City, and he'd go and he'd sell to a client. But each episode, it wasn't really about him. He was kind of just the facilitator. It would be this little slice of life of all these different people that use weed for different reasons, and they're going through different things and they face different challenges. It was really cool.
That's awesome. It's interesting because we've been doing this podcast, well, not being high, but Dualistic Unity for over 2 years now, and we host groups 5 days a week, and we actually get to see these little vulnerable moments in real time with people when they come to these groups and they're talking about how much their life has changed because of the insights that they're getting that I've learned from a lifetime of smoking weed. Admittedly, because as much as I've learned it through hardship, it's the weed that really puts you to the task, you know, and you're like, no, I got this. I feel in control. And all of a sudden you get high and you're like, what the fuck is happening? I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. And that's it. It's like,
Yeah.
relax, nothing's changed, just relax, you know, be willing to face it. And so there's so many lessons in that, and we talk about those lessons on the podcast. And of course we encourage people, like, if you haven't tried weed and you're ready for a bit of a workout, that's how you should look at it. You're going into a workout, you're going into uncertainty. Here's the practice, and it translates into the rest of your life if you look at it that way. If you look at it as a tool rather than an escape, then it can change everything. Because even then, when you're not high, it's the same thing. You start worrying about shit that's not there, you relax. You're like, I'm taking myself seriously again. And so it's great. And I know from just our life, because we smoke a lot of weed at our retreats, and we have a lot of conversations with people about their relationship with weed. We've had people get in touch with us and say, thank you so much. Because of this conversation, my relationship with weed has changed. Because as you said, a lot of people, they enjoy it when they're teenagers and then it turns ugly, and they don't realize why it turned ugly. And it's because their life became very serious. It became high stakes poker all the time, and it was you and your value that was on the line, right? So it's very hard to enjoy weed at that point. But once you start talking about that, you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll try and get high again. And you do, and you find yourself in this place where you're like, I'm just doing it again. I'm just taking myself seriously, and it changes everything. So it's really exciting in that way to be working with you and Mood, to have this cultural change, because
Yeah.
it's a change that reflects our willingness to keep moving forward in this mindset.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, it's like a it's argument around for us. It's like, conscious capitalism, whether you're selling, I don't know, bottled water or weed or whatever, like you want to do some good, and some businesses are more suited for that than others. And it's just, I mean, I've sold a lot of things in my career, and I've never sold anything that's kind of this a permutation of conscious capitalism that's kind of this far into that spectrum. And man, it feels great.
Oh, I can imagine, certainly, because you start to realize, like, okay, what is it really all about? Is it about how I look for the world? Because if that's the case, I'm going to try and, make all the money I can so I can present this fucking masquerade of something for the world. Or is it about me? Is it my experience right now? Is it how relaxed I am right now? And as that becomes your priority, like, the actions start to change. Maybe it's not so much about all the money in the world, because there's this like never ending fucking thing that you're looking at, like, oh, the more I have, the better I am, the more people like me. And it's like we're seeing very clearly that's not the case. But I think that's an extension kind of where our society's at in the terms of control, that extreme end of control. It's like, oh, for people to like me, for me to have a good life, I just have to have a fuckload of money. And when it's not about that so much anymore, because there isn't that control, it comes back to your experience right now, your interaction right now, what you're doing right now, because that's it. Like, that's all you got ever. But with the idea comes all of these sort of thing. Oh, the future, everything that's happened in the past. And people think it's cliche to think, like, the here and now is all you got. But like, when it really comes down to it, that is all you got. And so, especially when you're high, it's almost honing you in to right now. And so as I've become a little bit more relaxed, I've been able to, like, really hone my attention into what I'm doing right now. But as soon as I try and, like, sit back, or I get worried about not knowing what's next, then it's like all the stuff comes up, and there's almost like a more immediate blowback to delving into the illusion of control. When you're high, it just kind of shows you that. Whereas when you're sober, you can kind of, like, punch yourself into believing that you can have it. And it's not that blowback, because the blowback's in the form of tension instead of like other things. And that's just kind of built over time until, we're old and we're just like, don't want to question anything, holding on to everything. We're like, we barely even move.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really it's remarkable how a substance like cannabis that does affect people differently. It seems like a through line is that it always reveals you to yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And whether you're willing to or not, as you said, it's very much like a psychedelic in that way. And I really enjoyed how you described that because it's really when you're tense that it has that effect because it's your resistance to it. I've often said this, it's the gap that really kicks you in the ass, the gap between how relaxed it's trying to make you and how tense you're determined to be. And that's really it. And so I've really enjoyed this conversation. We're going to wrap up in the very near future here, but David, I have to ask, when it comes to consumption for you, what's your favorite methodology?
Yeah, I like two things. Well, I guess they're both technically edibles, but like a really low dose gummy. We've got some microdose gummies that are 5 milligrams of THC. And sometimes I won't even have the whole one. I'll have like half of it, you know? Like I'm really a lightweight these days. Or otherwise, I do like the beverage format. And we don't have beverages yet. We are working on it, although it's really difficult to rationalize the shipping expense as an e-commerce company. But we're working on that. I love that. You get to just get to munch, get to control. I love the ritual of rolling a joint. I love the smell of cannabis flower, especially ours. You know, it's like really good fresh stuff with lots of terpenes. Like I love that. But yeah, I'm not a smoker anymore. I'm an eater or a drinker.
That's very fair. I resonate with that a lot because I have been utilizing cannabis in exercising a lot too. I ran the New York City Marathon this past year, and during my training, I had to raise money, and I had to and so ways I did that was like, oh, let's think of some creative social media stuff. So I started like a gummy run series where I'd take a gummy and go on a run, and a variation of that from another company is they do have the drinkable stuff as well. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about your progress with that. So I'm curious though with, running, because that was also something that I think the reason that it hit was because I was just like jumping into it and like very much being myself, whereas a lot of my other content's more like advice, mental health related. And it's not to say that there isn't value in that, but like during those, I'm not really being myself in the same way as I am when I'm just like really high and just kind of like doing whatever I'm doing. So I was curious if for your gummies or if you have a certain strain or something mood wise that you think would be best for a run or for exercise, if there's like an uplifted or energized version, I'd be
Yeah.
very curious.
We do for flowers, we've gone really broad with our moods. We've accomplished that. So we have energized and creative and euphoric flower that would all be fun for exercising. On the gummy side, we've been working in R&D for functional gummies for way too long at this point and haven't yielded anything yet. But it's also really important to us that we don't just like kind of throw some like BS, like usual suspect type ingredients at it and be like, it does this when it really doesn't. Like we're really looking at like some pretty interesting nutraceuticals to augment the THC experience with gummies. But hopefully those are dropping in probably like 2 months or so. We are going to have an energized gummy. We've actually talked about a pre-workout gummy as well, but it's a little bit, not that it's not a cool use case, but it's a little bit more niche than some of the other stuff we're doing, like a menopause gummy and a menstrual relief gummy. And what's really important to me, sexual euphoria gummy. We're trying to crack, a legitimate aphrodisiac with THC. So these are going to be really big hits.
That's fucking awesome. Well, if you ever need a guinea pig for any and all of these things. Initially, my thought was about the, energized one for the runs and whatnot, but the other ones you mentioned,
Yeah.
happy to give them a shot.
Oh yeah, no, we do. We're always looking for signups. We, internally, not that like we're like you have to take a gummy or you no longer have a job, but no, like we're very friendly and we're like we open it up to our people internally. But you're welcome to be on that list. We'll ship you R&D gummies. Let us know what you think, and yeah, if you want to shoot me your email, I'll gladly introduce you to Katie, our director of ops, and she'll set you up.
I would love to chat with Katie. Yeah,
Yeah,
always down for free cannabis. Twist my
absolutely.
arm.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, David, this has been a blast, man. I know we gotta let you go here. I would love to keep chatting, but it's been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch and look forward to chatting again, hopefully soon.
Absolutely. And guys, yeah, it's truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, likewise. I look forward to having you back so we can talk a little bit more about this cultural change and how it's reflective in our own individual changes. Because although we perceive division between ourselves and everyone else, like I said earlier, it's not there, which means when we're asking, like, why is this happening? A big part of it is because you're changing, and that's changing everything. And so that's really exciting. David, thank you again so much. Dear listener, thank you for joining us. This has been a fantastic fucking episode. We will see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Yeah.
That was awesome. That was
It's
great.
so fun. Yeah.